She was called suspicious just for sitting in first class. But what the flight crew didn't know, she was about to become their new director. How does a black woman go from being humiliated at 30,000 feet to transforming an entire airline from the inside? Who was the silent passenger in 6C? And what secret did he carry that could shake the skies? What if the real turbulence isn't outside the plane, but inside the systems we trust the most? This is the story of Ava Monroe, a quiet, brilliant woman who boarded a plane just trying to get home, but walked off that same plane with a mission. When you're profiled, erased, and underestimated, do you disappear, or do you rebuild the rules from whispered warnings to systemic exposure? From a tearful child to a billion-dollar reckoning, Ava's journey will leave you speechless and deeply changed. This is more than a flight. It's a fight for dignity, for justice, for the right to simply belong. Before we take off into part 1, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support brings these real emotional stories to life. Now, buckle up. The story begins. The air was cool and dry as passengers filed into Gate 47B at Denver International. Rain tapped against the tall terminal windows in a quiet rhythm, and people were mostly silent. Mornings like this carried a kind of collective fatigue. A business trip here, a funeral there, a baby's first flight in a too bright world. Ava Monroe stood still at the front of the gate, her black wool coat buttoned all the way up, not from cold, but from instinct, habit. Her passport and boarding pass were tucked into a leather clutch. She held them close to her chest, like she always had to. She smiled softly at the gate agent, who barely looked up before mumbling, "Zone 1. "You're good. Thank you," she replied, her voice gentle. She didn't correct the tone. She had stopped correcting people a long time ago. As she stepped onto the jet bridge, her steps were calm, but her mind calculated. She always chose the window seat in row 1A, not for the extra legroom or the proximity to the galley, but for the simple, private pleasure of looking out over the wing. Something about seeing the sky from above had kept her centered over the years, even when nothing else did. Inside the aircraft, the cabin was still empty. Only one flight attendant stood at the front, a tall woman in a neat bun, scanning the first few rows. She had the kind of posture that announced, "I am in charge here, even when I'm not." "Can I help you?" the woman asked. Not rude, but not kind either. The tone was familiar. Ava responded gently, "No, thank you. Just finding my seat." The woman's eyes dropped to Ava's coat, then her shoes, then flicked briefly to her clutch. A beat passed. Then she said, "First class is forward. Economy's that way." It wasn't a question. It was a directive. Ava paused. Not long, just long enough for history to swell up inside her chest. "I'm in 1A, she said, calmly. She held out her boarding pass. The woman leaned in to read it, squinted slightly, then let out a quiet, "All right," the attendant muttered. "Go ahead." It was permission, spoken like forgiveness. Ava slid into her seat and exhaled slowly. The seat was cold. She placed her coat neatly across her lap. She didn't look up again, didn't glance at the woman, but she felt her, hovering, watching. That was how it always started. 3 minutes later, the cabin began to fill. A young man with a navy backpack smiled and took the aisle seat next to Ava. "Morning," he said kindly. His name tag read Liam Ortega, and from his brisk pace and confident stance, he was clearly crew, not flying, just repositioning. He offered Ava a warm smile, then settled in. Behind him, a flurry of boarding passengers filled the cabin with coats and conversations. The murmur of travel noise rose and fell like waves. In 2D, an elderly white woman adjusted her oxygen tube and gave Ava a brief, polite nod. Ava returned it, grateful for the quiet acknowledgement. But the tension was already there. It wasn't loud. It lived in the pauses, the glances, the timing, the same attendant, her badge now visible. Her reading Rebecca Langford began moving through first class. Greeting passengers, she offered coffee to the man in 1C, asked the woman in 2A if she preferred sparkling water, laughed with the couple in 3B and 3C. She skipped Ava, walked right by, came back twice more. Still nothing. Ava didn't flinch. She just folded her hands. Liam noticed. His eyes shifted. He didn't speak. Not yet. But he saw it. The plane took off smoothly. Denver disappeared into a sea of gray clouds, and soon they were gliding above it, all blue sky, stretching infinitely on both sides. Breakfast was served in the form of hot towels and polite conversation. Once again, Ava was skipped. No menu offered. No tray. No request. Ava waited. 10 full minutes. Finally, she pressed the call button. Beep. Rebecca returned, face pinched with impatience. Yes, Ava's voice was calm but clear. I noticed I wasn't offered a meal. Rebecca's brows rose. Oh, I thought you brought your own. I didn't think you were. She cut herself off. Not quick enough. Liam sat up. Everyone in first class receives meal service. Becky. Becky flushed slightly. Of course. My apologies. I'll see what we have left. She walked off. No apology to Ava. None that counted. Liam leaned over slightly and whispered, That wasn't okay. I know, Ava said softly. It never is. They said nothing for a while, just stared ahead. As the tray finally arrived, a cold plate of eggs. The last one, according to Becky. Ava accepted it quietly. She was used to last servings, used to being made to feel like an afterthought. But today was different. Today she wasn't just Ava Monroe, passenger in 1A. Today she was acting director of the National Aviation Transportation Safety Board, appointed less than 36 hours ago. Sworn in quietly. Her name hadn't yet made the press, but her authority was real, her power undeniable. And if needed, her voice would carry farther than this cabin could possibly imagine. But still, she stayed quiet. For now, Ava sat still. The hum of the engine masked everything except the quiet ache in her chest. She wasn't angry. Not yet. Anger would have been easy. Quick. Predictable. She had grown past quick reactions. In rooms where she was the only one who looked like her, she'd learned to sit with discomfort until it folded in on itself. That didn't mean she had stopped feeling. It meant she had learned how to carry it. Her fingers grazed the edge of the tray as she moved the eggs around without eating. Her appetite had disappeared sometime between the seatbelt sign and the moment Rebecca Langford asked if she belonged here. Liam glanced over. He noticed, again. You good? He asked. Ava nodded. Just thinking. He paused, then leaned a little closer. She's out of line. You know that. Right. Ava's eyes met his. They were steady, not sharp. Yes, but that's never been enough to stop people. He exhaled, his jaw tightening. This kind of thing happens all the time. I see it when I'm flying deadhead. I see who they greet and who they ignore, who they trust with overhead bins, who they ask for extra ID. It's always the same pattern. She didn't say anything, just listened. He went on. Softer this time. But you don't look like someone who lets people get away with things. That made her smile. A little. I just don't always confront it right away. The plane jolted slightly with turbulence. Not much. Just enough to silence everyone for a breath. Then Rebecca walked past again, pausing briefly at Ava's row. Her eyes scanned Ava's seatbelt. Then her expression soured ever so slightly when she noticed Ava had not touched the eggs. "Is everything all right with your meal?" Rebecca asked. "Sweet but clipped." "It's fine," Ava replied. Rebecca lingered. "If you'd prefer a fruit plate, I can check the galley. We might have something lighter." Ava met her eyes, calm, controlled. "No need. You've done enough." It was not angry. It was not loud. But the words hit like gravity. Rebecca straightened, then turned and left. Liam let out a breath. "Wow, you've got poise. More than I would." Ava looked out the window. The sky had shifted to a deeper blue. Clouds scattered like thought fragments beneath them. Poise is what people mistake for permission. I'm just trying to decide who I want to be right now, somewhere around cruising altitude. Ava pulled out her notebook. Not a tablet, not a phone, a black leather-bound journal with soft pages and faint blue lines. She wrote a single line at the top of the page. "Power without grace is just control." She underlined it once. The man in 2A coughed loudly, snapping her out of the moment. The murmur of conversation returned to the cabin like soft static. Someone ordered whiskey. Someone else asked for a second blanket. And then came a voice. "Excuse me, ma'am. I'm sorry, but I need to see your boarding pass." Rebecca stood beside Ava, hands folded, voice crisp, tone official. Ava blinked. "Excuse me. There's been an issue with the seat assignments. It appears there may have been a mix-up. I need to confirm your placement." Liam sat up immediately. "Are you kidding? We already went through this." Rebecca ignored him. She looked only at Ava. Ava's heart did not race. Her voice did not shake. She opened her clutch slowly, pulled out the ticket, held it up, not handing it over. Rebecca leaned in to read it, then stepped back, saying nothing. Ava did not look away. "You've seen it." "Anything else?" Rebecca said. "No, that's all. Thank you." She left. Liam's face burned red. "This is outrageous. That's not a seat check. That's targeting." Ava returned her boarding pass to the clutch. "It's humiliation disguised as procedure." There was a long silence between them. "I can report her," Liam offered. Ava looked down at her hands. "You could, but she'll say she was just doing her job. They always do." He tilted his head. "What about your job?" She turned to him, and for the first time, her eyes flickered with the full weight of who she was. "My job," she said softly, "is to protect passengers. All of them. Even the ones who get treated like they don't belong. Especially them." Liam stared. "Wait. Are you—" But she gently placed her finger over her lips. "Just for a second." "Not yet," she whispered. "Let's see who people choose to be before they know who I am." An hour later, the in-flight announcement came. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We'll be beginning our descent into Dulles International in about 30 minutes. Please return to your seats and ensure your seatbelts are fastened." The cabin began to shift. People gathered their laptops, slid phones into bags, tilted seats upright. Rebecca passed by again. She made eye contact with every passenger, even offered breath mints in a tray. She skipped Ava, again, but Ava didn't move. She had decided, and she was done being quiet. 10 minutes before landing, the seatbelt sign blinked on again. Liam leaned over, speaking low. "Can I ask something?" Ava looked up. "Why don't you want people to know who you are? You could shut all this down in 5 seconds." She folded her hands in her lap. Because I don't want respect that only comes with a title. I want to know who sees my humanity without credentials. Liam absorbed that, then nodded. And if they don't, she exhaled. Then they never had it to begin with. He smiled. That's power. That's real power. The wheels touched down with a bump and a drag. The cabin jerked forward, then slowly settled. The landing was smooth, quiet, controlled, just like Ava Monroe. She waited until the aircraft parked, until passengers began to stand and retrieve their bags. She stood last. Rebecca was near the cockpit, smiling now, her customer service mask firmly in place. Ava walked up, slowly. She looked Rebecca in the eyes, then calmly pulled a leather wallet from her bag, flipped it open, inside a government badge, sharp, gold, unmistakable. Rebecca blinked. Ava spoke softly, but clearly. Director Ava Monroe, National Aviation Transportation Safety Board. I'd like to speak with your captain now. Please inform him I'm conducting an unannounced internal compliance review, effective immediately. Rebecca's face drained of color. Ava continued, and if you're unsure what that means, I suggest you remain available. I will be including cabin conduct in my preliminary report. Passengers began to pause. Watch. Listen. Rebecca stood frozen. Liam stepped forward, standing beside Ava now, and Ava simply smiled. Not cruelly, not arrogantly, just fully, finally, as herself. The aircraft door had not yet opened. The passengers remained in their seats or awkwardly clustered in the aisles. Some clutched briefcases, some scrolled on phones. Most avoided eye contact with Ava Monroe. Rebecca Langford, meanwhile, stood frozen. Her posture was perfect, like a mannequin in a department store display. But her throat bobbed slightly. The truth was catching up to her faster than the plane had descended. Ava returned her badge to her clutch. She turned to Liam. You might want to step back. This next part isn't going to be quiet. He raised his eyebrows but didn't move. After what I saw, I'm not going anywhere. Just then, a voice came over the cabin intercom. It was calm, male, slightly hesitant. Miss Langford, you're needed in the cockpit. Captain Mercer would like a word. Rebecca flinched. Ava's gaze held steady. I'll be right there, Rebecca replied into the nearest handset, her voice cracking slightly. She turned to Ava, her eyes no longer commanding. They were searching, defensive, desperate to control what was slipping away. I think you're misunderstanding something, Rebecca said in a lowered voice. This has all been a miscommunication. I wasn't trying to cause trouble. I thought you might have boarded incorrectly. Ava didn't blink. You thought I might have stolen a seat I paid for. Despite my ticket, attire, and presence being identical to every other first-class passenger. The only difference was my face. Rebecca swallowed. That's not what You don't have to explain. Not to me. But you will have to answer to my office. Rebecca turned quickly and disappeared toward the cockpit. Ava exhaled, steadying her breath. This was where the real work began. Passengers whispered. Not the loud kind, the kind that lived in glances. The way people turned their shoulders subtly, like trying to avoid catching fire. A teenage girl across the aisle made eye contact with Ava. She wore thick glasses and an oversized hoodie. When Ava looked back, the girl held up a tiny thumbs up. Her lips formed the words, "Thank you." Ava smiled. There were always witnesses. She made her way down the aisle, slowly, carefully. She stopped at seat 6D, where a silver-haired woman sat, primly dressed in a powder blue cardigan. A knitting bag lay in her lap. Miss Dawson, Ava said gently. The woman looked up, surprised. Yes. Dear, I noticed you observing the earlier exchange. May I ask if you saw or heard anything you'd be willing to document? Emily Dawson blinked behind her glasses, then slowly nodded. I saw everything. I've been flying long enough to know when someone is being singled out. Would you be willing to give a short statement? In writing, I would, she replied without hesitation. I've got a pen and paper, old-fashioned, but it still works. Ava smiled. Perfect. She moved on, collecting observations. An older black man near the exit row offered to testify. A mother of 3 in row 8 said she had been uncomfortable with how Rebecca spoke earlier, but didn't know what to say at the time. That was always the pattern. The offense was sharp. The silence around it, even sharper. When she returned to her seat, Liam looked up, collecting evidence. Yes, Ava said simply. He glanced toward the cockpit. You know, the captain might try to smooth things over. That's what they usually do. Ava stared out the window, her reflection half merged with the clouds. I'm not here for apologies. I'm here for change. In the cockpit, Captain Mercer was pacing. Rebecca stood stiffly near the door, arms folded. I had no idea, Mercer muttered. No idea who she was. That shouldn't matter, Ava said as she entered. He turned, startled. You must be Director Monroe. My deepest apologies. I assure you this crew does not reflect. She raised one hand. Save it. I'm not here for a speech. Mercer cleared his throat. Of course. What can I do to support the investigation? You can start by pulling the internal cabin reports from this flight. I want to see every crew notation, time-stamped. Who flagged me? When? Why? He nodded. We can do that. Next, I want to speak with your purser and co-pilot. Off this plane. Not now, but soon. She turned to Rebecca. And you'll remain available for a formal debriefing. Refusal to comply will be noted in the report. Rebecca opened her mouth, closed it again. Ava nodded and walked out. She had done this dance before, but this time it was personal, back in the terminal. Ava waited by the glass window that overlooked the runway. The sun had started to set, casting long shadows across the floor. Her phone buzzed with emails and messages, but she ignored them. Instead, she just stood there, watching, not the planes, the people. A black father carried a sleeping toddler on his shoulder, her curls bouncing gently with each step. A woman in a TSA uniform offered a bottle of water to a nervous teenager. A wheelchair attendant gently adjusted a woman's scarf as she was rolled to her gate. Humanity, in its best form, always emerged when the world wasn't looking. Liam approached. I know you probably don't need it, but... Thanks, he said. Ava smiled. You'd be surprised how rare it is. He looked at her. Really looked. I saw it in the air. The way people reacted. You didn't yell. You didn't shame anyone. But you made every single person feel the shift. That takes strength most people never develop. Ava didn't answer right away. Then she said, It's not about being strong. It's about staying present, even when the room tries to erase you. He nodded. So what happens next? She turned her gaze toward the sky. Now we see how high this airline really wants to fly. That evening, in a quiet hotel room, Ava opened her laptop. She didn't start with a report. She started with a letter to the CEO of the airline, to the training department, to the press office. She did not write with venom. She wrote with evidence, with clarity, with conviction born from lived truth. The letter ended with one line. The skies are only free if all passengers fly without fear. Then she opened a second document, Nat's case file. 22207 Flight Delta East 409 Preliminary Findings. Discriminatory passenger targeting in premium cabin. She listed each witness, each violation, each silence that had spoken volumes. Then, she clicked, Save. Ava Monroe closed the laptop and sat back in the chair. Outside her window, planes continued to take off. She knew tomorrow would come with more hearings, more doubt, more people asking if she was making it a race thing. But tonight, she had her voice, and no one would take that seat from her again. The next morning arrived with a cold clarity. Ava Monroe woke before dawn, her body wired from a restless night. She lay still in the hotel bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the heating unit in the corner. She didn't check her email. Not yet. Instead, she let silence sit beside her like an old friend. This was the part of every case she dreaded. The moment before the world found out. At 6:15, her phone buzzed. A message from Denise, her assistant back in D. C. Need you to see this. Already made the rounds. PR went out at 5:48. Attaching screenshot. Ava sat up. She opened the message. The press release had the airline's official logo. Polished, cold. Delta East Airlines deeply regrets a miscommunication aboard Flight 409. Our crew acted with safety in mind at all times. We are reviewing internal procedures to ensure consistency in our premium services. All passengers were seated appropriately, and no further action is required. Ava closed her eyes. No apology, no ownership, just the word miscommunication acting as a shield. She opened her laptop and began drafting her response. An hour later, Ava walked into the regional NATS office near the airport. She wore her dark navy blazer again, this time with her badge clipped visibly to her lapel. Her face was composed, but her movements were sharper. Every step was deliberate. The receptionist, a young woman named Julia, stood up instantly. Director Monroe, we've got the media department upstairs. Legal is on standby. Good. And the transcripts cleaned and ready for briefing. Ava nodded and headed toward the elevator. On the ride up, she stared at her reflection in the mirrored wall. She looked calm. She didn't feel calm. She felt tired, not just from last night, from the years it had taken to reach this moment, the years of earning every credential, learning how to walk into rooms where no one looked like her and still command attention, the years of being told her tone was too strong or too soft, too detached or too emotional. And now, with one press release, they had tried to reduce the entire experience to a logistical hiccup. The elevator doors opened. She stepped out and walked into the conference room. Let me be clear, Ava said, her voice low and even. This is no longer just about Rebecca Langford. Around the table sat 6 people, 2 legal officers, 1 representative from the Department of Transportation, 2 members of the media team, and Denise via video call. This is about the culture that allowed it. Ava continued, and the executive team just confirmed they're not prepared to fix it. Denise spoke up. We just received word from a whistleblower, mid-level supervisor. Said Langford has had prior complaints, at least 4. All sealed. The DIAT rep looked up sharply. Where are they sealed? Internal HR, Denise said. Same office that issued the press release. A hush fell over the room. Ava leaned forward. Then we go public. The legal officer shifted in his seat. With caution, I hope. A move that big is overdue. Ava cut in. And strategic? She stood and walked over to the screen. Denise clicked to share the next slide. It was a still image from a security camera. Gate 32. The moment when Rebecca Langford first intercepted Ava near the first-class door. The image showed Ava holding her boarding pass, mid-sentence. Rebecca's hand was extended, her face tense. Behind them, 2 passengers looked on. A second image showed Ava taking her seat, her badge still hidden. The third was the most damning. Rebecca's hand reaching toward the cockpit phone moments before Ava revealed her identity. "Let the public decide," Ava said quietly. The room agreed. By midday, the video clips were circulating online, edited with subtitles, context, and a short statement from Nats. Safety concerns should never be code for racial discomfort. Discrimination at 35,000 feet is still discrimination. Director Ava Monroe has launched a formal investigation into the conduct of Delta East Flight 409 and the systemic failures it reveals. Within hours, the hashtag was trending. Flying while black. Mere seat injustice. Director Monroe speaks. Ava stayed mostly off social media. She had learned not to track the comments, not to dive into the chaos. Her job was to stay grounded while the internet spun. But she did read one message. It was from her father. "I saw the news. Proud of you. Ava, your mother would be too. Don't let them rattle you. Love, Dad." She read it 3 times, then closed her phone. Later that evening, Ava sat in a quiet cafe near the office. A man in a Delta East suit entered. She recognized him instantly. Charles DeWitt, Vice President of Flight Operations. He spotted her and came over. "Ava," he said carefully. She gestured to the empty chair. "Have a seat." "Charles." He sat, looked around, dropped his voice. "We didn't approve that press release. PR acted alone." She gave a dry smile. "That's a convenient story." "It's true. The CEO is furious. He wants to meet. Quietly. No cameras. Just to hear your thoughts." Ava stirred her coffee. "I've been giving you my thoughts for years. This time, I'll be giving the public my findings." Charles exhaled. "This isn't personal. It's always been personal." Ava replied softly. "For every passenger who got flagged for no reason, for every parent traveling with a child who was questioned too harshly, for every woman like me who paid for a seat and was asked to explain why." Charles looked down. "We want to cooperate." "Truly." "Then retract the statement. Apologize. Fire the person who wrote it, and open every sealed complaint in your system. That's a lot. It's basic decency," she said, "but you can call it a good first step." She stood and left. That night, Ava stood in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing her teeth slowly. Her mind replayed every scene from the past 2 days. The flight, the faces, the silence, the confrontation, the whisper of her mother's voice in her mind, telling her to keep walking. She looked herself in the eye. Was this still about justice, or had it become something else? Revenge validation. She didn't know. She only knew it felt heavy and necessary. The next morning, Ava woke to 3 missed calls and a breaking news alert. Delta East Airlines issues public apology. After Director Ava Monroe confronts discrimination. The statement was longer this time. Real names, real language. "We failed to uphold the dignity of every passenger. We recognize the harm done. We apologize unconditionally to Director Monroe and to every traveler who has felt unseen. We are committed to change." Ava exhaled, then closed the browser. She had a long way to go, but the skies had just shifted. By the time Ava Monroe arrived at Delta East headquarters in Chicago, the wind was clawing across Lake Michigan like it wanted to strip the truth bare. She wrapped her coat tighter and stepped through the revolving doors of the towering glass building, a place she had been invited to so many times before, but never with such tension in the air. Inside, everything gleamed with corporate sterility. The floors were polished, the plants too perfect, and the receptionist's smile far too rehearsed. Ava's heels echoed as she walked toward the security desk. "Director Monroe," the guard said quickly, rising to his feet. "They're waiting on the 17th floor. Conference room north." She nodded. The elevator ride was quiet. Her reflection in the brushed steel doors stared back. She wore her calm like a uniform, but inside her mind was a storm. She had not eaten all day. Her appetite had fled with the first email from legal. There would be resistance today. She could feel it like pressure before a thunderstorm. When she stepped into Conference Room North, 6 people were already seated. She recognized all but one. The woman at the head of the table rose slowly. Ava blinked. It was Meredith Holt, her former mentor, the woman who had once written Ava's recommendation letter for the Harvard Fellowship, the woman who had whispered years ago, "You're going to change the airspace someday." Now she looked older, sharper, less like a mentor and more like a gatekeeper. "Ava," Meredith said with a smile that did not reach her eyes, "thank you for coming." Ava inclined her head but did not smile back. She took a seat across from her. "We appreciate your cooperation in this matter," Meredith continued. "Our internal ethics panel has begun its own inquiry, and we hope your findings will assist us." Ava folded her hands in her lap. "I didn't come to assist. I came to hold accountable." That froze the room for a second. Then a man in a gray suit cleared his throat. "We understand this incident has drawn national attention. However, we'd like to keep this resolution internal if possible, for the sake of the industry." Ava looked at him. "And whose comfort does that serve? The passengers or the shareholders?" There was a pause. Meredith stepped in. "We understand the public is watching, but escalation has consequences, including political ones." Ava leaned forward. "I've lived through those consequences. Every time I had to explain to a TSA agent why I was carrying a badge. Every time I was asked if I was sure I was in the right lounge. Every time a flight crew assumed I was lost when I boarded first class." She inhaled, slowly. "I'm not here to negotiate dignity." The room grew silent. The younger man across from her, a junior counsel with a nervous twitch in his jaw, shifted uncomfortably. "But Director, there's also your role. If this continues, some may say you're not impartial anymore, that you're seeking attention." Ava turned to him, calm and sharp as glass. "Impartiality does not mean silence. Justice is not a neutral act." Meredith sighed. "You've always been principled. That's why I supported you, Ava. But you need to be strategic. We cannot dismantle everything overnight." Ava stared at her. "You're not afraid of escalation. You're afraid of accountability." Meredith met her gaze, and for a second the mask slipped. There was something like sorrow behind her eyes. "We've kept this industry from collapsing more than once. Sometimes we protect things for a reason." Ava's voice lowered. "And sometimes we protect the wrong things." She stood. "I'll be filing a formal injunction to release all sealed complaints against your cabin crew within the last 7 years. I expect your legal team to cooperate." The room erupted into murmurs. Meredith didn't stop her, just watched her go. Ava walked out without looking back. Outside the building, the wind hit her full in the face. She didn't cry, not yet, but something in her chest cracked. That night, Ava sat in her hotel room with the blinds open, watching planes rise and fall against the night sky. Her dinner sat untouched. She was exhausted, but not sleepy. Her mind replayed Meredith's words on loop. "We protect things for a reason." Ava thought of her mother, a school teacher who never flew until her retirement, who once cried in an airport bathroom after a gate agent assumed she was a nanny, who told Ava, after watching her graduate with honors, fly higher than they expect, and never forget where the sky begins. Ava whispered aloud to the empty room, "I haven't forgotten." But part of her wondered, had she flown too high? Had she become the very system she set out to challenge? Her phone buzzed. Denise again. "Emergency. Leaked memo. You need to see this." Ava clicked the file. It was a scanned internal document from Delta East dated 6 weeks ago. Subject line: protocol guidance for unidentified first-class occupants. Underlined: use discretion if passenger appears out of place. Escalate only if behavior persists or becomes disruptive. Particular attention solo travelers. Off demographic appearance. Priority boarding anomalies. The phrase "off demographic appearance" was highlighted. Ava read it twice. Then again. The policy had been real. It had never been just Rebecca Langford's decision. It was written into their procedures. The system had trained her to react that way, and someone had just leaked proof of it. The next morning, Ava stood before a podium at a press conference. She wore a simple black blazer, no jewelry, no makeup. The cameras rolled. She spoke clearly. "This isn't about one flight, one passenger, one mistake." She paused, letting the silence settle. "This is about who we let feel safe in the sky and who we quietly ask to prove they belong." She held up the printed memo. "This language, these procedures are not accidents. They are decisions. And decisions like these teach discrimination to disguise itself as protocol." A reporter shouted, "Will you be recommending fines?" Ava looked directly into the lens. "We will be recommending more than fines." She let the silence return again. "We will be recommending transformation." That evening, Ava walked alone through Millennium Park. The city lights were starting to come alive, and the air was brisk. She sat on a bench near the Cloudgate sculpture, watching tourists take photos. A little girl in a red coat ran past her. She looked about 7 years old. Her father chased after her, laughing. The little girl turned and smiled at Ava, then ran on. Ava smiled back. She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out her mother's old boarding pass from the first flight they took together. Yellowed now. The ink faded, but the date was still legible. May 12th, 2001. Ava folded it carefully. Sometimes the sky had to break before it could be rebuilt, and she was willing to stay in the storm until it did. The video surfaced on a quiet Thursday morning. It was uploaded anonymously to a small aviation reform forum entitled, with chilling simplicity, "Delta East Crew Training Session, November 2022. Within hours, it had been mirrored across social media and news sites. Ava Monroe was in the middle of a meeting with the Transportation Ethics Council when her phone buzzed. Denise's text was short. "You need to see this. Now." Ava stepped out into the hallway, found a quiet bench beneath a long mural of the Wright brothers, and pressed play. The grainy footage showed a conference room. A projector illuminated a slide recognizing flight disruption risk factors. A man in a dark polo shirt paced at the front, speaking with the mechanical tone of someone too used to giving bad advice. "Sometimes," he said, "risk factors don't look like a raised voice or a suspicious bag. Sometimes they're subtle. Someone who boards first class with no luggage, who doesn't make eye contact, who seems nervous." He tapped the slide. We've compiled demographic trends based on incident reports. This isn't profiling. This is pattern recognition. There's a difference." The room nodded along. Then came the part that made Ava's stomach twist. Statistically, some of our false boarding attempts have come from individuals who don't match the socioeconomic profile of our typical FC flyers. You need to trust your instincts. If something feels off, escalate. There was no shouting, no slurs, just sanitized discrimination presented as operational wisdom. Ava closed her phone slowly. The silence felt heavy. She looked up at the mural. The Wright brothers had imagined flight as something that would unite us. How had it become this by noon? The story was viral. Training tape shows. Delta East encouraged profiling. Flight risk or flight. While Black Aviation's dirty secret caught on tape, news vans crowded the sidewalk outside Nat's. Ava avoided them as best she could. But inside, there was no avoiding the storm. She sat in a strategy meeting with the Department of Civil Transportation. The secretary was on the line. Her voice was stern. "We need an official position before this turns into a political sinkhole." Ava kept her tone calm. "We do have a position. It's called reality." There was a pause. "We don't want to accuse the industry too broadly." Ava didn't flinch. "I'm not accusing the industry. I'm describing a wound." Another voice joined. It was Mark Liu, Assistant Chair for Commercial Safety. "This video was old, 2022. It doesn't mean it's current practice." Ava looked at the speakerphone like she could see through it. "If it's not current, why are the metrics in that slide identical to what I experienced last week?" Silence again. Then, "Slowly," the secretary said. "Do what you need to do, but tread carefully." Ava hung up with a strange mix of power and isolation curling in her chest. She was being allowed to lead, but not supported. That evening, Ava got a call from a number she didn't recognize. She nearly let it go to voicemail, but something told her to answer. "Director Monroe." "Yes. Who is this?" "My name's Caleb Torres. I was a flight attendant at Delta East." "Until this morning." Ava sat upright. "What happened?" "I emailed my supervisor a formal statement about that video. Then someone called me 20 minutes later and said my schedule was being reviewed. When I asked why, they said I'd breached protocol. That was it." Ava's voice softened. "I'm sorry. That shouldn't have happened." Caleb exhaled into the phone. "I'm not sorry. I've been carrying this for 2 years. I trained under that guy. Watched him give that exact speech to every new hire class. And the worst part, we believed him." Ava leaned forward, pressing the phone closer. "What made you change your mind?" Caleb's voice cracked. "A woman boarded first class once. Young, maybe 23, clearly nervous. She had a violin case and an envelope from a scholarship program. I flagged her. My supervisor made her stand for 30 minutes while we verified her ticket. She cried the whole time." He paused. "She was on a full ride to Juilliard. That was her first plane ride. Ever." Ava closed her eyes. Caleb continued. "I told myself it was just caution, but it wasn't. It was training and cowardice." Ava spoke softly. "You're not a coward. Caleb, you're here. That matters." He hesitated. "There's more. I know where they keep the rest of those training modules. There's one on foreign accents, one on conflicting visual cues. They used to joke about how poor rich can look sometimes. I can help you get it." Ava nodded slowly. "I'll protect you, but only if you're sure." "I've never been more sure." 2 days later, Ava stood behind a podium again. This time, the Capitol press room was packed. She held up a flash drive. This contains the training protocols used by a major American airline between 2019 and 2023. Protocols that encourage frontline staff to equate unfamiliarity with threat, culture with caution, appearance with anomaly. She paused. This isn't about retribution. This is about responsibility. We must unlearn what we rewarded. Reporters shouted questions. Will there be fines? Is Delta East cooperating? Will anyone be fired? Ava raised her hand. We do not fix structural rot by trimming branches. We dig at the roots. Another question came louder. Why are you so invested in this case? She looked out over the room. Because I was the one they flagged. Because my mother cried in an airport bathroom. Because I refused to die with my wings folded. But all she said was, because silence is not a strategy. That night, Ava received a handwritten letter slipped under her hotel room door. It read, Dear Director Monroe, I have flown for 31 years. I have served passengers from every walk of life. Last year, I saw a fellow attendant humiliate a man in a wheelchair because he could not produce ID quickly enough. She said he was delaying the flight. I said nothing. This is me saying something now. Please don't stop. Margaret. Crew, 713. Retired. Ava read the note 3 times, folded it, placed it beside her mother's boarding pass. 2 truths, side by side. We belong, and we are not alone. 2 days after the press conference, Ava Monroe found herself in a mahogany-paneled room deep beneath Capitol Hill. The air was too cold and too quiet. No cameras, no public statements, just a semicircle of policy advisors, security contractors, and legal consultants seated behind nameplates. At the center was Chairman Alan Bryson, head of the Transportation Oversight Committee. His expression was unreadable as he adjusted his glasses and addressed Ava. Director Monroe, thank you for coming on short notice. What you revealed this week has triggered a need for internal review. Ava met his eyes calmly. Of course. I assumed that would be the case. Another voice, softer but sharper, chimed in. It was Elise Durant, Special Counsel for Airspace Security. What we're trying to assess is whether your exposure of Delta East training materials compromises any current enforcement protocols, specifically those coordinated through NEDGE. Ava tilted her head slightly. NEDGE, you're referring to the private security contracting system? Elise gave a curt nod. Yes, particularly flight marshals and post-9/11 behavioral assessment protocols. Some of those overlap with what you criticized in the media. Ava leaned back in her chair. They overlap because they were never reformed. They were renamed, repackaged. Alan Bryson sighed quietly. This is not a trial. Director, we're just trying to avoid panic. You've caused a media storm. There's talk of hearings. Airline stocks have dipped. Some of our defense partners are uneasy. Ava smiled gently. Good. Unease is the beginning of accountability. One of the consultants, a man from an aviation lobbying firm, spoke up. With respect, Director Monroe, the flying public needs to feel safe. That's not always compatible with idealism. Ava's eyes sharpened. I'm not advocating idealism. I'm advocating intelligence and fairness. We've trained our crews to be afraid of people who don't look like power, who don't act like status. That's not safety. That's prejudice in a uniform. The room fell silent. Then Chairman Bryson folded his hands and said, Let's shift to a more practical question. What do you want? A public apology policy change. A new training module. Ava looked at each of them, one by one. I want the system that flagged my humanity to be dismantled, not repainted. She stood up slowly. And I will not stop until that happens. That night, Ava returned to her hotel, her body moving with the weariness of someone carrying more than a title. She poured a cup of tea and sat on the windowsill overlooking the Capitol dome. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Caleb. "They've frozen my airline ID. I can't even log in. But I have the modules, all of them, sent to your private drop. Use what you need." "I don't care anymore. Just tell the truth," Ava replied with just one word. "Always." She scrolled through the files he had sent. One video caught her eye. Its title was innocuous: In-Air Anomalies Protocols, V3.2. She clicked play. It began with a still slide. "Internal behavioral triggers do not circulate." A male voice began to narrate. "Mid-flight behavior anomalies may include, but are not limited to, excessive stillness, refusal of refreshments, non-engagement with seatmates, or repeated observation of cabin crew movement." The list continued. "Passengers of concern may attempt to blend in by dressing inconspicuously, using polite but short responses, or wearing name brands inconsistent with their listed occupation or home address." Ava stared at the screen, heart sinking. They were teaching paranoia, institutionalized suspicion wrapped in behavioral science. It wasn't just that Ava had been profiled. It was that every moment of discomfort, every glance, every pause had been calculated, expected, encouraged. She felt her chest tighten, not from fear, but from fury restrained. She walked to the small desk, pulled out a legal pad, and began to write. It wasn't enough to expose policies. She had to show the cost. 2 days later, Ava stood in front of a Senate subcommittee panel. But this time, she didn't bring statistics. She brought stories. She read letters from retired flight attendants who had been silenced, statements from passengers who had been removed from flights for speaking a second language, testimonies from single mothers, from musicians, from veterans. And then she told her own story. On Flight 88 to Chicago, I sat in 2A. I was dressed simply. My ID was scanned 3 times. A flight attendant hovered every 10 minutes. I was offered water with the phrase, "Are you supposed to be here, ma'am?" She paused. I am. But the question wasn't about my seat. It was about my existence in that space. Some of the senators looked uncomfortable. One tried to interrupt, but Ava continued, her voice low but firm. "You created a system where suspicion is a job description, and you gave it the authority to humiliate without consequence." She opened the final file Caleb had sent and passed printed copies to the panel. "This is your doctrine. This is the manual that trains suspicion to masquerade as security." The room grew still. No one spoke for a full 30 seconds. Then Senator Granger, an older man from Ohio, finally asked, "What exactly are you asking for?" "Director Monroe." Ava answered without hesitation. "I want a civilian-led audit of all private security behavior training programs. I want independent oversight for passenger complaints. I want race and class sensitivity reintegrated into federal training, not buried under patriotism." She paused. "And I want whistleblowers like Caleb Torres protected, not erased." The room was quiet again, but this time there was something else in the silence. A shift, a crack, the sound of something beginning to break open. Later that evening, Ava sat with Denise in her office. They were both quiet, sipping tea as the sun dipped behind the buildings. Denise finally broke the silence. "You know they're going to fight this, right? The contractors, the airlines, even some inside Nats." Ava nodded. "I know." "And you're still going to keep going." Ava looked out the window, where lights were beginning to flicker on in the dusk. Yes. Denise smiled softly. You've always been a storm in a silk scarf. Ava chuckled gently. I'm tired, Dee, but I'm not finished. She walked to her bookshelf, pulled out a thick binder labeled FAA Reforms 2002-2018, and placed Caleb's printed modules inside. History doesn't change by accident, she whispered. It changes because someone refuses to forget. By the time Ava arrived at the Nats building the next morning, a line of protesters had gathered outside. Some held signs that read "Security, not sympathy." Others waved airline banners in silent opposition. She stepped out of her car and was instantly met by a hush in the crowd. Cameras clicked. A few voices muttered insults. But no one stepped in her path. Inside the glass doors, the tension followed her. The front desk attendant, normally cheerful, did not look up. The halls were quieter than usual. Denise greeted her on the executive floor with a guarded smile. You've got a visitor in your office. Ava frowned. I don't have anything scheduled. Denise's eyes shifted toward the hallway. I didn't say it was scheduled. Ava entered her office and froze. Sitting in the chair across from her desk was Thomas Ellison, former director of operations, her predecessor, the man she replaced after his quiet early retirement last year. He stood slowly. Hello? Ava. She closed the door behind her. I heard you moved to Wyoming. Or was it Montana? Places like that don't ask many questions. Ava folded her arms. What are you doing here? Thomas's face was thinner than she remembered. Older. His gray suit hung slightly loose at the shoulders, but his voice still carried that unsettling blend of charm and threat. I'm here to warn you. Ava stayed silent. You think the Senate hearing was the peak of this storm? It wasn't. You're only halfway up the mountain, and there's no railing on the other side. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thin folder. They're preparing a lawsuit. Not against you directly. Not yet. But against Nats. For breach of contract, mishandling of sensitive materials, leaks. Ava didn't blink. They're bluffing. Thomas's smile barely touched his eyes. They're billion-dollar bluffers. You think truth is enough to win this fight? It isn't. You need leverage. He slid the folder toward her. This is your lifeline. Sign a formal retraction. Frame the hearing as miscommunication. Say your statements were taken out of context. You can keep your seat. Keep your peace. Ava didn't look at the folder. Instead, she walked to the window and stared out at the sky. Why did you leave? Thomas. He hesitated. I got tired. She turned to face him. No. You got quiet. There's a difference. Thomas's jaw tightened. Then let me tell you the difference. You think this job is about changing things, but it's about surviving the things you can't change. And you're about to learn that the hard way. He stood, brushed off his jacket, and walked to the door. Don't say I didn't try. The door closed softly behind him. Ava stood still for a long time. Then she opened her desk drawer and found an old envelope she had never sent. It was dated the day she got the job. Addressed to herself. She unfolded the letter. Dear Ava, if you're reading this, it means something has shaken your belief. Maybe someone told you to compromise. Maybe a threat has reached too close to home. Whatever it is, remember this. They didn't choose you because they believed in justice. They chose you because they thought you'd play along. But that seat has never belonged to them. It belongs to the people you serve. Do not shrink. Do not soften the truth to make them comfortable. Speak in full voice. Love, Ava. She exhaled, slowly, then placed the envelope back into the drawer. Unopened, but now fulfilled. That evening, she met Caleb in a quiet corner of an old library in Georgetown. He wore a baseball cap low over his eyes and kept his voice barely above a whisper. "They're tracking my phone. I only came because I trust you." Ava nodded. "You did the right thing. You gave people something real to hold on to." Caleb looked at her, his expression tired but resolute. "They froze my accounts. My family thinks I'm paranoid. But I know what I saw in those meetings. It wasn't just bias training. There were lists, passenger risk profiles, some based on income brackets and surnames." He slid a small hard drive across the table. "It's all here, but this is it for me. I'm done." Ava placed her hand over his briefly. "You've already done more than enough." They sat in silence a moment, two strangers bound by one truth. Then Caleb asked quietly, "Do you ever feel like you're screaming underwater?" Ava's throat tightened. All the time. Back in her apartment, Ava opened the hard drive and began scanning its contents. The documents were worse than she expected. Not just training scripts, but actual incident reports, color-coded assessments, tags next to names. One document was labeled Flagged First-Class Deviations, another titled Anomalous Seat Reservations. She found her own name in a list dated 6 months before the incident on Flight 88. Passenger Monroe, Ava J. Status First-Class Anomaly, Notes Unverified Federal Status. Suggested Response Re-engagement Protocol. Her hands curled into fists. They had marked her before she even boarded, before a word was spoken. Her presence had triggered a system that saw her not as a human, but as a variable, a glitch, a warning, a threat. She backed away from the screen, closed her eyes, and tried to breathe. Not from the betrayal, but from the weight of knowing she wasn't the only one. Not by far. The next morning, Denise entered Ava's office holding a sealed envelope. This just came through an unmarked courier. Ava opened it and scanned the letter inside. It was a formal notice, effective immediately. Her security clearance had been reduced, pending internal investigation. She looked up at Denise, who already understood. "They're trying to silence you," Denise whispered. Ava nodded, quietly, "which means I'm getting close." Denise hesitated. "Do you want to stop?" Ava looked past her, toward the window where morning light filtered in, soft and clear. "No." Her voice was calm, certain. "If I stop, then the next person they try to erase won't have a voice left at all." Denise smiled, a tear catching at the corner of her eye. "Then I'm with you." They stood together in that small, quiet room, surrounded by walls of policy, power, and silence, and chose defiance. The night Ava uploaded the documents, she didn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table, staring at the blinking cursor on her laptop, her finger hovering over the send button. The data Caleb had passed to her was damning. Passenger profiling, suspicion algorithms, secret reports sent to third-party contractors. Worst of all, a ranking system that scored travelers not just by destination or behavior, but by skin tone and surname. The system labeled it unconscious risk mapping. Ava had stared at those words until they blurred. She could have passed it along quietly, slipped it to a senator under sealed cover, asked for a subcommittee to quietly investigate. But she knew how that went. The silence that followed, the buried hearings, the edited transcripts, this time had to be different. Her eyes drifted to the framed photo on her windowsill. It was her grandmother, Ruth, standing in front of a train car in Alabama, holding a small suitcase and wearing a stiff church hat. That woman had cleaned the homes of people who wouldn't let her drink from the same glass. She had walked home past burning crosses, And still, she never lowered her head. Ava whispered to the photo, "I won't lower mine either." She attached the documents to a burner email account, addressed it to 3 outlets she trusted: independent, unbought. She added a note, short and simple. These documents were created under the authority of a federal transportation agency. They speak for themselves. I release them publicly and fully. Then she hit send. The cursor vanished, and the silence after was the loudest sound she had ever heard. By morning, the storm had begun. The headline on Civic Press read, "Exclusive Federal Flight Program Flagged Passengers by Skin Tone. Documents leaked by NAT's director." Within hours, her name trended globally. Some praised her bravery. Others accused her of faking the documents. The agency issued a cold statement. "We are reviewing the authenticity and chain of custody of the files released. No further comment at this time." But the whistleblower movement ignited like dry tinder. Former flight attendants began posting anonymously. Captains leaked memos. Agents from international ports added fuel, sharing similar patterns in their own systems. The nation, once again, split open at noon. Ava arrived at her office to find 2 security officers waiting outside her door. "Ma'am, we've been instructed to escort you off the premises." She nodded calmly. "I understand." Denise followed behind her, silent, eyes burning. They allowed her to collect her purse and phone, but her badge and keycard were deactivated on the spot. Outside, news vans had already arrived. The cameras zoomed in the moment they saw her step through the doors. Someone shouted, "Do you regret the leak?" She paused, faced the lens. "No, I regret that it had to be leaked at all." And with that, she walked away. That evening, her apartment was quiet. Too quiet. She sat on her couch, phone lighting up every second with messages from strangers, offers of interviews, death threats, gratitude, legal threats, more gratitude. She turned it over face down. There was no manual for this. No checklist for what to do when you expose a system built to erase people like you. No rulebook for what to feel when you realize your career is probably over. She closed her eyes and leaned back. For a moment, she imagined her grandmother's voice. "You did what you came here to do. Now finish it." 2 days later, Senator Arlen from Connecticut requested Ava to testify again this time, not in private session, but a public federal hearing. The topic: racial bias in algorithmic systems and aviation safety. Ava stared at the invitation in her inbox. Denise sat across the table, pushing a mug of tea toward her. "They're going to come after you even harder now. You know that." "Right, I do. And you're still going to do it." Ava looked up. "There's a girl right now in a school uniform who will get flagged 10 years from now for booking the wrong seat. She won't know why. Her boarding pass will just scan red. She'll be asked to step aside, questioned, humiliated." Her voice cracked, but did not fall. "No one will explain to her that she's not the problem. The system is." She inhaled slowly. "So yes, I'm going to do it." Denise reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Then I'm staying by your side." The morning of the hearing, Ava wore a dark gray suit and a simple pearl necklace. She braided her hair the same way her mother had before job interviews when Ava was just a little girl. As she stepped into the Capitol hearing room, dozens of camera flashes met her. Protesters stood outside with signs that read, "We fly too, and bias has no altitude." Inside, the room was packed. Senators in tailored suits, reporters with pens poised, and on the first row behind her, seated like a quiet anchor in the storm, was a teenage girl with brown skin and bright eyes. She clutched a small spiral notebook. Ava smiled gently at her before turning back to the microphone. She began without reading notes. I was born in Atlanta. My mother was a nurse. My father was a school janitor. We took road trips in old cars that barely made it over state lines. I never flew on a plane until I was 23. It was a gift from a friend, a scholarship interview. Her voice remained steady. I remember how the flight attendant watched me, like I didn't belong, like the seat I was in must have been a mistake. That memory followed me into every flight I've taken since. I thought I had outrun it. But I see now I hadn't outrun it. I had inherited it. She paused. This country is full of systems that carry forward the assumptions of the past. Sometimes it's not a person saying no. Sometimes it's a software line someone wrote years ago, based on fear dressed up as logic. Senator Arlen interjected. Miss Monroe, are you suggesting this was deliberate racial profiling? I'm saying it was automated. The room fell silent. No one had to say the words out loud anymore. The system did the discrimination for them. A beat passed. Then she added, and we let it. Outside the chamber, as the cameras flashed and microphones pointed toward her again, the same teenage girl approached shyly. Miss Monroe. Ava turned gently. My name is Lena. I'm starting aviation school next fall. I wanted to be like you. Ava knelt slightly, smiling. Lena, don't be like me. The girl blinked, confused. Be better, be bolder, be earlier, so you don't have to fight the same battles I did. Lena nodded, eyes welling. Ava stood, turned toward the crowd, and walked forward without flinching. She no longer had a badge, but she had her voice. And now, so did others. Ava Monroe was no longer a director. No title, no badge, no office door with her name etched in brass. But for the first time in her career, the world had truly heard her. Her testimony spread across every platform within hours. News anchors replayed her words. Civil rights leaders quoted her. Students studied her phrasing in debate clubs and classrooms. And in the airports she once walked through unnoticed. Strangers now approached her quietly and said thank you. But fame was not comfort. Visibility was not protection. By the third day, the backlash arrived. It came first as comments. She should be grateful she even had a seat. This is reverse discrimination. If she can't handle systems, she shouldn't be in leadership. Then came the reporters digging into her past, publishing her tax records, spinning old meeting notes into scandals, pulling distant cousins out of nowhere for quotes. They painted her as angry, difficult, divisive. One evening, while making tea in her small apartment, Ava heard a knock at her door. It wasn't a neighbor. It was Caleb. She opened the door slowly, then pulled him inside. He looked thinner, exhausted. His hair had grown out and his eyes darted nervously toward the hallway. I don't have much time, he said, breathless. They're trying to scrub the servers, the backups, everything. They're calling it internal optimization. But I've seen the commands. They're erasing entire logs. Any trace of the other algorithms? Ava's hand tightened on her mug. You're saying they're destroying evidence. I'm saying by Monday, none of this will have ever existed. She stared at him, then moved to her bookshelf. She pulled out a hard drive from between two novels and handed it to him. I downloaded everything before I left. Not just the files I released, all of it. Caleb's eyes widened. You had this the whole time I knew they'd do this. I was just waiting to see how far they'd go. Caleb reached for it, but she pulled it back slightly. There's something else, she said softly. They're not just targeting data. They're targeting you." He blinked. "What do you mean?" "They leaked your name to an internal committee. They're building a narrative that you were a disgruntled contractor with ties to an extremist group. That's ridiculous. Yes, and irrelevant." Ava said, "They don't need truth. They just need doubt." Caleb sat down, head in hands. "I should have never opened that file." Ava sat beside him. "You didn't open it. You lifted the curtain. There's a difference." 2 days later, Ava stood before a rented podium in a community college auditorium. A town hall had been organized by aviation students, mostly young Black and Latino women. They wore matching T-shirts that read, "We belong in every row." When Ava stepped up to speak, the room went quiet. "I used to think progress was a hallway. You enter one door, push through the obstacles, and eventually reach another. But now I see it's more like a cycle. Progress turns like a wheel, and sometimes it runs over people." She scanned the faces. "We are not here just to be tokens or exceptions. We're here to redesign the system itself." The crowd rose to their feet. Among them stood Lena, notebook in hand again. This time, she raised it high above her head. On the front, she had written one word in thick ink: rewrite. That evening, Ava received an encrypted message. It was anonymous, routed through 5 international servers, but the wording was unmistakable. "You don't know what you've stepped into. This was never about one airline. Keep pushing, and you won't just lose your job. You'll lose the floor beneath your feet." Ava stared at it, unflinching. She had seen warnings like this before, when she protested police use of facial recognition years ago, when she refused to remove ethnic names from a hiring algorithm. Each time, they tried to scare her into silence. Each time, they failed. Still, this one felt different, not because it was more threatening, but because it was colder, more organized. She turned to Denise, who had moved into her spare room temporarily, just to keep an eye on her. Denise read the message and exhaled slowly. "I think it's time we talk to someone with bigger teeth." "You mean a lawyer?" "No, a tech journalist." Ava raised an eyebrow. "There's one who specializes in predictive surveillance systems," Denise continued. "Used to be a government consultant, and then he flipped. Started exposing how deep some of these algorithms go. He's trusted, careful, and he's been poking at gnats for years." Ava nodded slowly. "Set it up." 3 nights later, Ava met the journalist at a quiet diner outside the city. His name was Marcus Flint, mid-40s, wore wire-rimmed glasses and a sweater that looked like it had been stitched during the Cold War. He listened to her speak for over an hour without interrupting. Then he finally said, "What you've exposed is the surface, but beneath that is a web of cross-industry profiling, insurance, banking, air travel, even college admissions. It's not a conspiracy. It's coordination." Ava swallowed hard. Marcus leaned forward. "Tell me, have you ever heard of something called Vector?" She shook her head. He scribbled something on a napkin. "Look into that. It's a data-sharing protocol used between private firms and government agencies. But the handshake agreements are never documented. That's why it's legal." Ava looked down at the word Vector. Marcus continued, "You're not just disrupting a flight system. You're threatening a $2 billion cross-data infrastructure. That's why you're getting these warnings." Ava leaned back. "What happens if I keep going?" He looked at her solemnly. "They'll try to discredit you, exhaust you, then isolate you." She folded the napkin and tucked it into her coat. "Then I'll make sure I'm never alone." By the weekend, Ava's story had reached global networks. Her testimony had been translated into 7 languages. A South African aviation group issued a formal statement of solidarity. A university in Tokyo invited her to keynote, and the NATS board called an emergency vote to investigate all first-class flagging protocols. But even in progress, darkness loomed. Ava noticed a black car idling across from her apartment for hours at a time. She received calls with no one on the line. Her building's security cameras glitched at random hours. She kept her routine public, kept Denise close, informed Marcus of every move. She had learned long ago that fear, when shared out loud, lost some of its grip. But she also knew not everyone was playing by rules. On Monday morning, as she stepped out for coffee, Ava saw something tucked into her mailbox, a single boarding pass. No return address, no explanation, just her name, her real name, and the destination Anchorage, Alaska. She turned it over. One word was handwritten on the back. Final. The boarding pass was tucked into a plain white envelope. No sender, no return address, just Ava's name, printed cleanly and deliberately across the top. Anchorage, Alaska, Flight 781. Terminal B, Gate 17. Ava sat at her kitchen table staring at it for over an hour. It didn't feel like an invitation. It felt like a test. Denise stood behind her, arms folded. We call the FBI. Ava shook her head. If we do, they'll pull me off any flight. Claim it's a credible threat. But if someone went this far to get me on board, there's something they want me to see. Denise lowered her voice. Or something they want you to disappear into. Ava turned slowly, meeting her eyes. Then I'll leave the trail lit the whole way. She opened her laptop and began logging her route into 3 encrypted journals. One sent to Marcus, one to her attorney, one to Caleb. She recorded a video message, too, explaining where she was going and why. Before she zipped up her coat, Denise handed her a small pen. This isn't for writing, it's a GPS transmitter. If it stops blinking, I'm coming after you. Ava gave a thin smile. Thank you for always believing me. Denise's voice cracked. I didn't believe you. I believed in you. That's different. At the airport, Ava passed through security without issue. She kept her head low, sunglasses on, heart steady. The boarding gate was quiet. Only a few passengers for a near-empty flight. A silent route to a silent state. The moment she stepped onto the plane, she felt it. Every muscle tensed. The air was colder than usual. The lights dimmer. The flight crew quiet, professional, distant. She was escorted to seat 2A. She swallowed hard. This was the exact seat where it had all started. Different plane, same position, same proximity to authority and assumption. As the engines roared and the flight lifted off, Ava looked out at the clouds stretching beneath them like silk. She closed her eyes, listened for anything strange, every shuffle of a shoe, every beep of the intercom, every breath from behind her. But the flight was quiet, too quiet. 3 hours later, they landed in Anchorage. Snow drifted in soft spirals as she stepped off the jet bridge. A tall man in a tan coat held a sign with her name. He looked military, clean-cut, measured movements. Ms. Monroe, he said. We've been expecting you. She nodded cautiously. Who is we? He handed her a sealed envelope. The North Access Review Board, Interim Branch. We don't officially exist, but we monitor anomalies within vector-linked systems. Her heart skipped. You're connected to Vector, not connected. Oversight adjacent. You've tripped several dormant nodes. Ava opened the envelope. Inside was a single photo. Blurry, night vision. but unmistakable. It was her, standing in front of Gate 6, her bag open. That night, the night of the incident, you flagged on 5 different surveillance webs simultaneously, the man said. That doesn't happen unless someone alters protocols manually. Someone flagged you, then tried to cover their tracks. Ava's stomach sank. She followed him into a black SUV with no plates. They drove in silence for 20 minutes, then arrived at a snow-covered building with no signage. Inside, everything was sterile, quiet, high-tech. A screen displayed her name the moment she stepped into the room. An older woman sat waiting, salt and pepper hair, glasses perched low. She looked like someone who once ran military tribunals and now taught ethics at Yale. Ms. Monroe, thank you for coming. Ava remained standing. Why am I here? The woman gestured to a screen. You're here because of this. A video began playing. A familiar face appeared. Caleb. He was in a white room, speaking quietly to someone off-screen. This system was not designed to protect passengers. It was designed to profile and redirect them without their knowledge. Nats didn't develop it. They licensed it from a shell group linked to Vector. They knew. The screen went black. Ava's breath caught. Where is he now? We believe he's in federal custody, the woman said. They're labeling it as unauthorized possession of classified infrastructure blueprints. Ava's voice was sharp. He was a contractor. That data was public until I exposed it. Yes, the woman replied calmly, but now that you've made it valuable, they're calling it protected. The man in the tan coat stepped forward. We need to ask you something delicate. Ava waited. We want you to go back in. Quietly. Not as a whistleblower. As an observer. She frowned. Why? Because there's more. The system that flagged you wasn't built in isolation. It's being replicated across industries. Airports were just the testing ground. Ava leaned forward. You want me to spy on my own industry. We want you to be the bridge between exposure and accountability. She sat down slowly. What's the risk? The woman answered. Everything. That night. Ava stayed in a cold guest room with paper-thin sheets and a locked cabinet labeled emergency disclosure. She did not sleep. She thought of Caleb, alone somewhere, punished for telling the truth. She thought of Denise, pacing a living room with one eye on her blinking transmitter. And she thought of the girl from that first flight, the one who looked up at her with wide eyes and asked softly if it was okay to dream big while being black and visible. Ava rose at dawn. She wrote a note. If you're reading this, it means I took the assignment, not because I trust them, but because I trust you to watch over what matters. Attached was a file. All of the data. All of the names. All of the source code. She encrypted it with a phrase no one else would guess. A whisper from a memory. Seat 2A. Then she boarded a return flight under a different name. The clouds looked the same, but she did not. At the terminal, a woman in uniform greeted her. Not a flight attendant. Aviation security liaison. Young. Black. Sharp eyes. Firm grip. We've been waiting, the woman said. They promoted you faster than expected. Ava blinked. I'm sorry. The woman handed her a new ID badge. Ava read the name. Director of Passenger Ethics. National Oversight. She turned slowly. Who authorized this? The woman smiled. You did, when you refused to sit in silence. As Ava stood there, still in shock, a group of young interns passed by. One of them paused, then looked up at her. Ms. Monroe, the girl said quietly. Thank you for standing up. They tried to bury your voice, but we heard you anyway. Ava nodded. Her voice had not been buried. It had been planted. And now it was growing. The new badge still felt foreign in her hands. Director of Passenger Ethics. 3 weeks ago, Ava Monroe had been publicly humiliated for daring to sit in a seat she had paid for. Now she had the power to rewrite the playbook that made that humiliation possible. But the weight of that power pressed against her chest like a seatbelt too tight. She stood at the gate for Flight 208, her first official appearance in her new role. It was ceremonial in nature, an internal observation, quietly flown, quietly monitored, but the symbolism was impossible to ignore. Same airline, same route, Washington Dulles to San Diego, same seat number, 2A. The difference this time was who welcomed her on board. "Good morning, Director Monroe," the flight attendant said, her voice calm and respectful. She was young, Latina, and wearing a new regulation pin that read Ethics First. Ava nodded and stepped inside the aircraft, her eyes scanning the layout with surgical precision. Nothing had changed, but everything had changed. She took her seat and opened a slim laptop. Today was more than ceremony. Today, she was watching for anomalies in real time. Her team back at headquarters had embedded a new behavioral scanning module on this route. It didn't watch passengers. It watched staff, monitored for tone, response time, bias indicators, subtle infractions, and Ava would be the final validator. 2 rows ahead, a black couple entered with their toddler daughter. The mother looked weary, the father alert. When a white passenger glanced at them with suspicion, the attendant redirected the gaze with a calm smile and offered the child a small plush toy with the airline logo. Ava watched the moment, a tiny rebalancing of a centuries-old scale. One moment, one child, spared from the seed of shame. Across the aisle, a Middle Eastern man was attempting to store his violin in the overhead bin. A flight marshal approached, then hesitated. Ava made a quiet note. The violin was permitted, but the marshal's hesitation revealed a profile check was triggered by keyword instrument, a leftover from old protocols that assumed threat before identity. She flagged it, not to punish, but to retrain. The flight ascended, and with it, Ava's heart lifted a fraction. An hour into the journey, the lead flight attendant approached. She held a sealed envelope. This arrived through internal dispatch. We were told to deliver it mid-flight. Ava took it, fingers trembling. Inside was a note. "They know you are watching, so watch closely. 6C. Ava glanced discreetly down the aisle. Seat 6C was occupied by an elderly white man, mid-70s, sharp suit, quiet demeanor, nothing overtly unusual. She tapped her tablet, pulling up real-time behavior analysis. No flags, no alerts. But when she zoomed into the boarding footage from the terminal, her breath hitched. The man in 6C had bypassed facial ID. He had been waved through manually. No log of his ID. No seat assignment on original manifest. She pressed the internal comm, cabin access control, confirm authorization for 6C. A pause. "Ma'am, 6C does not exist in today's manifest." Her throat tightened. "Lock seat. Activate silent recording. Alert security team for arrival." She stood quietly and walked down the aisle, heart pounding, every step calculated. As she neared the seat, the man looked up and smiled. "You're smarter than they said," he whispered. Ava did not smile back. "Who are you?" He tapped the armrest twice. A subtle signal. She saw the scar on his wrist. Military pattern, vector trained. "You're not here to observe," he said softly. "You're here to choose." Ava stared. "Choose what?" whether to expose the next layer, the one beneath data, beneath policy, the layer that governs who even gets to ask questions. Her mouth went dry. He slid her a black memory stick. No label. No encryption visible. Plug it in and you won't sleep for a week. But you'll finally understand why you were dragged into this. She did not reach for it. What's the cost? The man's voice dropped lower. Peace of mind, certainty, trust, everything you still cling to. Ava returned to her seat with the stick burning in her hand like coal. She did not plug it in. Not yet. Instead, she stared out the window as clouds gave way to the outline of distant mountain ranges. And she thought of her mother, a black nurse who'd stitched up racists in silence. She thought of her mentor, Marcia Bell, who had died with a file drawer full of truth no one had cared to open. She thought of Caleb, still in holding, still waiting, still hoping she wouldn't waste what he risked everything to reveal. She thought of Denise, who would throw herself in front of a moving train if Ava stood on the tracks too long. And she thought of the little girl on the earlier flight, and the way she had leaned into Ava's shoulder when the world grew too loud. Ava lifted the stick and stared at it again. There was no choice. She inserted it. Her screen went black, then white, then black again. Lines of code scrolled. Names, tags, internal policies marked red flag. Then one folder caught her eye. Project Magnify. Inside photos of boarding passengers. Tagged by skin tone, facial structure, name origin, accent patterns, clothing choices. All automated, all categorized, all predictive. They had built digital racism and branded it as risk assessment. She trembled. It was worse than she thought, and now she knew. When the plane landed, authorities waited at the gate. Not for Ava, for the man in 6C. He was gone. No trace. Disappeared between the rows like a shadow dissolving in sunlight. But the memory stick remained. So did the proof. Ava walked into the press conference like a quiet storm. No makeup, no media prep, just truth. She laid the stick on the podium. This is what we found. This is what we allowed. And this is what we will never permit again. The crowd went still. A reporter from NPR asked softly, "Do you feel safe now?" Ava looked at the ceiling, then the floor, then directly into the camera. "No, but I feel awake." Months later, Ava stood in front of a group of new hires. They were young, diverse, skeptical. She smiled. Seat 2A changed my life. They looked confused. She continued. I was profiled, then erased, then asked to disappear. But instead, I sat still. And silence has a way of turning into something powerful when you survive it. A hand rose from the back. Do you think it's better now, Ava thought. No, I think it's just louder, but I'd rather hear it than pretend it's not there. She walked past the rows, her heels soft against the floor. And if you ever feel invisible, remember this. Your story may start in silence, but it can end in volume. Tell it. She placed a small card on each desk. It read, Ethics is not policy. It is presence. Ava Monroe had been seated in 2A when the world told her to be small. Now she stood at the front of the plane, and the sky was listening. Some flights change your destination. Others change your entire direction in life. Ava Monroe didn't just survive discrimination. She transformed it into a force for justice. She proved that quiet strength, when rooted in truth, can move mountains, or in her case, rewrite the skies. But behind every Ava, there are thousands unheard, thousands profiled, thousands dismissed just because of their skin, their seat, their silence. So let this story sit with you. Let it open your heart to the woman who didn't yell, but still made the whole world listen. Let it remind you that dignity should never be a luxury, and equality should never need permission to board. If this story touched you, made you feel, made you think, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Because every time you do, you help us bring more stories like this to the light. Stories that challenge injustice. Stories that heal. Stories that speak for those still waiting to be heard. And don't go far. Our next story might just be the one that changes the way you see the world. We'll see you in the next flight.